Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to AFSC's weekly Facebook Live. In these moments, we take about 20 to 30 minutes to just talk with AFSC staff from around the country on what they're doing with their work. And so today I will be chatting with two of our staff in Newark about the work that they are doing to support Black immigrants as they are Black immigrants themselves. Please let us know where you're joining us from. You can put your name and your location in the chat. Welcome. I'm Peniel Ibe, the American Friends Service Committee's Policy Engagement Coordinator, and I'm reaching you out of DC today. And with me, I have Aisa and Serge, and they will also introduce themselves before they start sharing. So today you're joining us as part of a series of events, the Black Immigrant Advocacy Days of Action that we are supporting and partnering with other immigrant advocacy groups, especially Black-led advocacy groups, to uplift the issues that Black immigrants are facing, especially in Black History Month, but also in response to the series of attacks that the community has been facing for years now that has been heightened towards the Trump administration and in the beginning of the Biden administration. On the first day of Black History Month, as the nation prepared to pay tributes to generations of African Americans who struggled and continue to struggle through anti-Black structural racism, discrimination, and violence, and thriving and prevailing, another ICE deportation flight took off to Haiti. It is incongruent to deport Black immigrants to poverty, torture, and death when the current administration has called out racial equity as a priority issue. The question then that we ask is immigration not a racial equity issue? Many from Cameroon, Angola, Congo, Mauritania, Haiti, and other nations like Jamaica are threatened daily with deportation, often after they are denied a fair asylum process by the previous administration. This is cruel and deadly. If you've seen images from Haiti this week, you know that Haitians are in the streets facing violence for protesting an authoritarian government. Adding to this crisis, and in this month, the Biden administration is deporting an estimated 1,800 Haitian immigrants, or as Americans will say, 1,800 Haitian immigrants back to Haiti. This includes hundreds of children and families and infants. And on a daily basis, we see 2 to 3 deportation flights. It is unacceptable for the US government to deport already vulnerable Black immigrants and force them into dangerous political conditions that they fled. These deportations represent the latest in a long history of intentional abuses by immigration authorities against Black individuals, children, and families who seek safety and security in the United States. During this Black Immigrant Advocacy Days of Action, Black immigrant advocates are calling on the Biden administration to recognize and address systemic anti-Black racism in how the government treats immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. The hashtag that is being used to uplift and amplify these voices is #ActForBlackIms, and you will see that in the chat soon. So feel free to uplift stories if you're a Black immigrant or an advocate as well with this hashtag. As we call on the Biden administration to immediately end the deportation and detention of Black immigrants, we're asking that the Biden administration address systemic racism in the US, and immigration must be included. Today, I'll be briefly speaking with Aisa Diallo, a detention attorney with AFSC's Immigrant Rights Program-Detention project in Newark, a mouthful, and Serges Demefack, the coordinator of AFSC's Immigrant Rights Project and Detention and Deportation Project. Both immigrants themselves. Aisa is from Guinea and Serge is from Cameroon. And they advocate for Black immigrants in multiple ways, and will be sharing firsthand why we need to continue amplifying groups like UndocuBlack's voice when they say immigration is indeed a Black issue. Hi, Aisa and Serge. Serge, if you just want to briefly introduce yourself and the role that you play in AFSC's Newark office.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peniel, and thank you for all those following us today on YouTube. My name is Serges Demefack. I am the End Detention Deportation Project Coordinator at the Newark Office of American Friends Service Committee. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you, Serge. Aisa?
Hi, my name is Aisa. I'm a detention attorney at the Newark office. Thank you for joining us, and I'm very happy to be a part of this discussion.
Thanks, Aisa. So this is a very short discussion, so I'm just going to jump right into it so we can hear from you both. So Serge, as you work to end detention and deportation, a key reason why those systems exist is because of the criminalization of migration. Even though migration is a human right, the United States policies have criminalized migration. How do you see this criminalization disproportionately affecting Black immigrants that you support?
Yes, thank you very much, Peniel. It is indeed the criminalization of Blackness, let's put it that way. But at the same time, you have the compounding effect of a long history here in the United States where people who are Black are specifically targeted, by policies and also by the actors, by law enforcement officials, to really make sure they rein in people who look like us, because you have to be clear about it. So and then when you live in a context where the person in charge of the country, we've seen over the past 4 years, where the former president, I don't like to call his name, clearly, used, some serious derogative vocabulary to qualify our people, and in a way, he validated the attitude, the behavior of the people who are in charge of, basically implementing justice throughout our community. So we get to the point where, you can clearly see, for example, I have the opportunity to go into many of our jails and to, all kinds of meetings that are discussing issues regarding immigration. And in jails in particular, you could see how, when you look at the ratio of Black in the immigrant population, non-citizen people in the United States, it's about 7 or 7.5%. But when you look at the same data in the people who are actually, facing deportation, it jumped up to close to 20%. So, and those are, the kind of data that doesn't lie. So, I seriously believe that something needs to be done, and then I'm glad we're talking about it here right now.
Thanks, Serge. So I think that's so important that you've said, and you've also drawn parallels between detention centers and jails. We know that Black immigrants live the double jeopardy of being targeted by law enforcement as well as immigration enforcement. And we also know that our policies in the United States find multiple ways to entangle these racist systems, finding ways to make sure that sheriffs are deputized as ICE officials, and ICE officials are now plainclothes officers can sort of act as law enforcement, harming individuals, putting them in jail. Both systems are terrible. Both systems profit off the back of Black people, and that's really, really a terrible thing. And which is why we are saying immigration is a Black issue, because if we don't address that, we miss an entire nuance when we're trying to end detentions and deportations. So we know that people fleeing danger and violence in their home countries should be welcomed with compassion. That is something we believe as AFSC. That is something that we believe as individuals. But we also, should not be named, the Trump administration repeatedly imposed multiple restrictions on asylum seekers, dismantled the system, and made it harder for people to claim protections through the little processes that were available. In detention centers today, multiple asylum seekers from Cameroon, from Haiti, from Congo, who are facing serious threats and have traveled through torturous conditions, are there and are not allowed to sort of seek refuge. Aisa, in your work as a detention attorney, how have Black asylum seekers been impacted by these draconian policies of the previous administration? And what do you think needs to be done to address those issues?
Yeah, so just to kind of follow up on the conversation regarding the criminalization, in immigration law, a criminal conviction can have serious consequences that range from mandatory detention. So if someone is serving their state time and they go into immigration, that they won't be able to have a bond to get released. But we also know that a criminal conviction can also knock a person from seeking different forms of relief. So because previous administrations have kind of prioritized the removal of individuals with criminal convictions, this has resulted in a higher number of Black immigrants being impacted due to the injustices in the criminal justice system, right? So we know that Black communities are faced with higher arrests, higher incarceration, and just Black communities are are policed heavier than other communities. So it's no surprise that this would also be the group that's impacted the most in immigration, as the both of you mentioned. Just to kind of give an example, in 2017, a report was published by the Community Service Society, and they looked into fare evasion data arrests in New York City particularly, and they found that in Brooklyn, poor Black communities had a higher arrest rate for jumping turnstiles than any other area in Brooklyn or in New York City. And that was due to the higher policing that happens in these communities. And this issue with fare evasion, it's not an issue that's just New York City specific. It's, it's a national issue. California, Washington, D.C., Oregon, and Washington State, they've actually reported seeing similar disparities with something as small as, jumping a turnstile. And just to bring it back in the context of immigration, something as minor as having a conviction for a turnstile jumping can have like dire consequences on individuals. So when we think about, the reports that are showing poor Black communities being policed at higher rates, and the priority of administrations being removing individuals with criminal convictions, of course, Black immigrants are going to be the ones who bear the brunt of these policies. So on the context of just the criminal side and crim immigration, as people have termed it, there's that. But, there's also the impact of the administration's policies on Black asylum seekers, specifically surrounding the conversation of racial bias and discrimination. Peniel, you mentioned what's happening with Cameroonians and Haitians and Congolese, and that's just something that we continuously see because of the way racial inequity has been happening in the country, and discrimination, and also how the conversation of that has been happening. And I think what we can do is just kind of continue to have these conversations and just shed light onto what's happening, with the Cameroonians, and, what we're hearing about being forced onto planes, and just taking action to try to figure out how to get this into the media and how we can spread the word about what's happening, because it just can't continue happening.
Yeah. Thanks, Aisa. And I think that's something that I want to hear more of, because when you have an asylum seeker who's Black, what are challenges that you face with doing that detention defense for them? Do you see some differences in how they're responded to in the court spaces, et cetera, than other immigrants?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is there are stereotypes and stigmas that are perpetuated. And so you see those coming out with African individuals. There's a lot of that passport may not be legitimate, so we have to take a closer eye to it. Or, you see someone's claim for relief, because it's a common claim, just being scrutinized a little bit more than you would see other kinds of claims. So that's one challenge. Another challenge is just implicit bias, right? We know that it exists. We each have our own implicit biases, but it's always hard to kind of juggle when in immigration court, whether a comment that's made or a decision that's made, was it made because of an implicit bias, or, was it made because of a stigma that came out? And I think just overall, lastly, the biggest one is the overall injustices in the criminal justice system. There's this term that has been coined, the pipeline to deportation, the pipeline from prison to deportation. And, we see a lot of young individuals who are caught into the system of removal and deportation because of the criminal justice system. And it's almost like a catch-22. And I would say those are kind of the three biggest challenges that I've seen as an attorney and have been faced with.
So true. I remember reading about your work in New Jersey to get people out of prisons, especially at the height of COVID, because, prisons are a public health crisis in themselves, not adding on a pandemic. And we heard stories of immigrants who had compassionate release through that process, then turned over to ICE, and then going back to detention centers. And that just literally is an example of the double criminalization that immigrants face, especially Black immigrants. And when we talk about the racism and the anti-Blackness that Black immigrants face, there's multiple articles of abuse. There was the alleged, forced hysterectomies of Cameroonian women in detention centers, of abuses forcing people to sign deportation orders and forcing them on flights that advocates continue to fight for justice for those individuals. Essentially, we know that we cannot take down this detention and deportation machine without addressing the larger framework upon which it was conceived, which is white supremacy. When Haitian individuals, their bonds are as high as $50,000 while other immigrant groups at lower bonds, it's like, why nobody should be in detention or deportation or in these prisons. But then you have to ask, how so is it that even in criminalization, your Blackness is working against you? And why do systems allow that? It doesn't matter how hard people work, how deserving people are of anything, if the underlying value in these immigration policies is to revert preference to a certain color of immigrants against another. And so as an organization, and Serge, a question for you, as an organization, we've called for the defunding of these immigration enforcement agencies because we know that they stand for nothing right, nothing good, nothing moral, nothing humane. We've called for the abolition of ICE. We call for the defunding of ICE and CBP. If we were able to end these harmful practices, what would it mean for the Black immigrant community and ultimately the immigrant community at large?
Yeah, thank you very much, Peniel. That's a very fantastic prospect. Just thinking about ending immigration detention, deportation, abolishing ICE. You will see people still leaving their homes and going out there and vacating to their activities, because the matter of fact is people are afraid. They can't even stay in their own home. They can't even enjoy their neighborhood. They don't even feel they belong to a community. And I think with the COVID-19, locking everybody down, it has given the people the feeling of what it is like to be allowed to go out of your house. And I think that's how I can equate the sentiment, because I don't think many people have that feeling. And I truly believe that our communities are deprived of something that's very fundamental in anybody's life. Just the freedom to walk, freedom to go places, because of the fear that's being hammered into their psychic, into their communities. So we see that as a prospect of pure liberation. And, hopefully ending it will occur. But what I really hope for is the change in mentality, because you can be, the system may end, but are people going to change? Is the people who are used to targeting you with this form of microaggressions that Asia just mentioned previously. Are people going to really see you as one of them? Because that's fundamental into what we are hoping to change. But starting to break down this systemic system is the major step. I cannot dismiss that. But I truly believe that that's the first step. But the next step is going to be making sure that our institutions, that our schools, that people are treated fairly, that in our courts, that you're just giving the same service. When it comes to bond, that you receive the same fair treatment. That when it comes to the way you treated when you walk in a store, that people don't already see you as a criminal even before you start heading to the cashier. So those are fundamental building blocks that will have to follow. So, but I am hopeful that with the current administration, we are going to see some more concrete changes. But I'm yearning, and I want to see it happen. I don't want to, an exuberance of winning the elections over now. So we really are looking for something concrete to really say, yes, this is the signal, the tide is changing, and to make our brother and sister, all of African people, the Black people, come out of their homes and start feeling like they belong to, a world that everybody deserves a life to live in.
Thank you so much, Serge. Some very important points there. It's more than a system, it's a mentality. And I think we even saw that at the beginning of the Biden administration, where it seemed like ICE, that we know has gone rogue and has always been rogue, was defying orders and deporting people, detaining people. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, wow, ICE. And we continue to say the problem was not the Trump administration. A house built on racism and anti-racism will produce fruit. that bear racist and anti-racist, anti-Black ideals. And our community, like I said, it's the freedom to be Black, the freedom to be free, and liberation from our minds, from these systems that hold us hostage. And I know part of our AFSC staff are doing communications. They're doing conversations of communities without policing. Like, what does it look like for us to change the narrative around public safety, where we don't look at other people as a threat, but rather we're looking at our collective well-being. And so I encourage you, if you're listening to this, to check out some of the resources on AFSC's website that helps you sort of think through what it means to live in a world without ICE, without immigration enforcement, without over-policed communities, without over-militarized communities, all in the guise of national security or public safety, because people are not living freely if that's how we frame our society. So just to wrap up this side so we can go to questions if there are any in the comments section, how can people make sure that they're centering the issues of Black immigrants when they talk about immigrant rights advocacy? Because like we said, immigration is a Black issue. It's a Black issue too. It stems from anti-Blackness, which is why we still fight for immigrant rights advocacy, because it's rooted in anti-Blackness that our policies are this way. So how can people make sure that they're centering the experiences and the lives of Black immigrants when they're engaging in immigrant rights advocacy? And Aisa, just a few words from you.
Yeah, I would say the most important thing is recognizing where it comes from, right? Like what the root cause of it is. We have the immigration issue that stems from the criminal justice system, or, you know, if we want to talk about communities that are facing food injustice, it's just so much. And so I think having that discussion of kind of focusing on the root cause of it, and we can kind of build up to figure out how to, you know, make this system go away the way it is.
Thanks, Aisa. And Serge, any contributions from you?
Yes, I think we need to start by loving each other, right? You know, treat your neighbor like you would treat yourself. So, and that's something that's very fundamental in building any society. And that's something that I hope that I try to practice, because that's something that's really fundamental. Even whether you are an elected official or you just like anybody person right there in your community, be kind to each other. That will go a long way in healing, you know, the staggering number of problems that plague us.
Thank you, sir. So I'm hearing from you both. Go to the root causes. Some education is needed. And there are tons of resources out there available to sort of learn how you can be a better advocate. And a key piece, like Serge said, being a better advocate is loving your neighbor as yourself. So how would you like to be advocated for if you were the one marginalized in a conversation? I think tapping into that human nature of wanting justice for yourself, I think that's another way to advocate for others. So thank you both, Aisa and Serge. We're going to turn to our listeners. If there's anybody in the comment section who has any questions for either Serge and or Aisa or even me, we have some few minutes now that we can answer them. And I know we have a little bit of a lag, so we'll just give it a minute to see if there are any questions that will come in. All right. I'm seeing none thus far. Thank you to our tech support, Bo, for putting all these good links in the chat. Please, folks, take a moment to take action. Let your members of Congress know that we need to start changing our systems. We need to abolish ICE. We need to spend our money where our community's well-being will be centered, rather than on immigration enforcement and on separating communities and terrorizing individuals as well. So seeing no questions from our folks, I guess we answered this very clearly. We have educated the people, y'all. Thank you so much, Serge. Thank you so much, Aisa.
Very welcome.
Thank you.
Looking forward to having you all talk more on these issues as well. And I would also just say, we encourage folks, if you are really looking for firsthand stories of Black immigrants and how they're advocating for themselves, how we're advocating for ourselves, how our community is fighting against injustice, I encourage you to visit organizations like the Haitian Bridge Alliance, Undocu Black, Official Black LGBTQ Migrant Project, and the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. Oh, we do have a question. So Nicole's asking, can you comment on media coverage of Black immigrants? I think from my perspective, so at the federal level, it's very, very, very poor. Very poor. And I see my colleagues, other Black immigrant advocates here, struggle to put the stories in the forefront, even within immigration spaces as well. There's a lot of anti-Blackness in the way that we approach immigration as an issue. And so the media still uses language like criminal or illegal or aliens. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done because that is dehumanizing and it's rooted in the way slavery was rooted to break down the substance of the individual. So yeah, that's something that we see here. Some folks are doing better, and there are some media allies that they work closely with to make sure that the stories are authentic, that they are nuanced in really what's going on, and in making sure, like I said, that that the voices that are amplified are directly impacted voices, and they're not talking for people who are directly impacted. So the groups that I listed out, Haitian Bridge Alliance on Docu-Black, Official PLMP, and Baji, make sure to do this work on a daily basis so that they can do that. But I wanted to hear from you all in New Jersey. How does this look when you're writing or talking about Black immigrants in your media?
I mean, I think, to be honest, we have this sense of invisibility, right? When you talk about Black stories, I mean, you look through a newspaper, you don't see much, but when you look at data, it's a different story. And so, and that has been the story of Black people, right? Some of our best days are hidden. Fantastic stories, they're completely hidden. But what purpose does that serve? Because these are other strategies to really bury down the story of the people who can actually touch, the broader public. I mean, today people still look at Africa as one country. I mean, this is what we see on a daily basis. You go to court, you hear a judge talking about a case as if it was something that situation that's all over Africa. But while the story that's being told by the attorney is for one country. And so those are the challenges. So but we do our best at American Friends, to really tell the story of Black immigrants. At American Friends, at least as a Black person, American Friends give me the chance to go out there and tell the story of Black immigrants. And that's something that I take it as something that's very important. It's now my job to take that opportunity to tell the story. I have the chance to go out there and advocate for our people. And that's a privilege for me. And we are going to continue working hard. We know that the Black immigrants are coming from countries that are also challenging themselves, countries that have a history of suppressing, the freedom. So when they come to America, it doesn't just go away. So you can also understand their resistance sometimes to be open and share their stories. So those two elements and other factors compounded does not help us have visibility in the media.
Thank you so much, Serge. I know we're running out of time. I just know there's one question about what are some of the resources available for training for attorneys who wish to provide pro bono support on cases. I'll push this to Aisa. I would say reaching out directly to the groups that I've mentioned who definitely need pro bono support. Honestly, any help. As a lawyer, as an attorney, you looking at a document is much better than some of us who are just policy advocates looking at a document. So reaching out to those groups through, I think, their social media, emails, etc., saying, I would love to support. How can I do that? And working from there as well. So Aisa, any other suggestions for this individual's question?
Yeah, there are two that I would recommend. The first is the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and the second is the Immigrant Legal Resources Center. Both do a really good job on posting on different issues that are being dealt with, trainings, their videos, publications. So I would definitely recommend those for trainings.
Great. Thank you so much, Aisa. I think, we should go ahead and wrap up now. Thank you all so much for joining and engaging with us. Thank you, Serge and Aisa, for sharing. So important to hear your perspectives. And thank you all once again for the work that you're doing. It is much appreciated. And happy Black History Month, folks. Make sure you support a Black person today. Yay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peniel, and thank you to the team in the back office.
Yes, thanks,
Yes.
Mo. All right.